not afraid.
You will be.
Beware of destinies. They're rarely what you expect.
Ahsoka, why did you leave?
You were once Anakin Skywalker, my father.
Do you know what I've become?
If you will not fight, then you will meet your destiny.
Never. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
I am no Jedi. Then I will avenge his death.
Revenge is not the Jedi way.
I am no Jedi.
Early in the Clone Wars, there was a young, yet extremely talented Togruta named Ahsoka Tano. Though barely a teenager, Tano was inserted into the Clone Wars on the front lines. She was apprenticed to the infamous Anakin Skywalker, a maverick in his own right, who could match the Padawan's energy and vigor. The pairing, which was set up by Grandmaster Yoda, would be a test for both the apprentice and the master. Anakin gained a greater sense of responsibility, while Ahsoka learned what strong leadership really meant. The duo went on many missions together, Ahsoka making a prominent name for herself throughout her many battles. Unlike her master, Ahsoka played situations closer to the book, but she also learned that certain situations needed a more proactive, Anakin-esque approach. However, near the Clone Wars' end, just before Ahsoka's potential knighting, she stepped away from the Jedi. Tried for crimes committed by her friend Barriss Offee, Tano felt betrayed by the Jedi Order, deciding that she should walk her own path in the Force. Years passed as she and her master drifted apart, both following a course that deviated from the Jedi way, where Anakin, now Darth Vader, committed himself to the teachings of the Sith. Ahsoka pledged herself to nothing but herself, walking a path not dictated by any one discipline. When Master and Apprentice met again, Ahsoka vowed to avenge the Master Vader had destroyed, proclaiming that she would not leave Anakin like she had done so many years before. Though she ultimately failed to achieve revenge, it was perhaps her fight with Vader that led to another's ability to redeem the man she once admired.
I'll never turn to the dark side. You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Luke Skywalker, the last of the Jedi, was debatably trained by three masters. The first was Ben Kenobi, the old hermit from the Dune Sea, a former Jedi Knight who knew Luke's father during the Clone Wars. Kenobi introduced Luke to the mysteries of the Force, teaching him the ways of the Jedi Knights of the Old Republic. The second of Luke's masters was the former Grandmaster himself, Yoda. The old Jedi Master taught Luke how to center himself in the Force, how to use it for knowledge and defense. Luke's training under Yoda was invaluable, but for the Jedi prospect, the most effective lessons came from his experience. And here, he would find an unexpected third master, his own father, Darth Vader. Through Vader, Luke discovered the trappings of the dark side, but he also recognized that the dark was something that could be turned away from, that there was always a choice. It was only Luke who could redeem his father, only Luke who saw good in him, and through his selfless and heroic act, he did what even Ahsoka could not do. He brought Anakin Skywalker back from the dead, casting away the dark and proclaiming himself a Jedi, going on to blaze a trail for a new Jedi Order, and then miserably failing. For this video, I will be examining the canon versions of these characters, using Legends continuity where it does not conflict with the main canon. For Luke Skywalker, I will be observing him up until Return of the Jedi, utilizing Legends material such as Shadows of the Empire, the Dark Horse comics, and other subsequent sourcebooks. For Ahsoka Tano, I will be observing her up into her appearance in Rebels, using material such as the novels, comics, and sourcebooks. Luke Skywalker has a pretty standard build for a human male, though he is a fair bit shorter than his father. Even so, his agility is comparable to Anakin, and he has just as much strength, if not more, based on his contention with the suited Vader, who has more strength than Anakin. During Empire Strikes Back, Luke keeps himself in good shape, but his intense training with Yoda elevated his physical ability, learning how to augment himself with the Force. This includes his heightened endurance as displayed in Weapon of a Jedi, as well as his quick reflexes and his mounting strength, as indicated in The Return of the Jedi. Ahsoka Tano has a standard build for a Togruta female. In adulthood, she is relatively tall, nearly 5 inches taller than Luke, in fact. Agility was perhaps her greatest asset, using the Force to augment her physical attributes to enable the martial skills she is known for throughout the Clone Wars. And though she withered under the mounting strength of Darth Vader, she has shown an ability to contend with stronger opponents when applying her own talents for dexterity. At the end of Luke's training with Yoda, he is able to hold a handstand for hours, even while balancing the Jedi Master on his heels while levitating several objects. Because Luke is such an intuitive fighter that needs to adapt on the fly, endurance is paramount for his toolset. Luke's reflexes are such that he can navigate Beggar's Canyon, observe starfighters at sublight speeds, and contend with the assassin android, Guri. What's more, he disarmed the fastest shot in the galaxy, cutting Boba Fett's rifle in half before the bounty hunter could get a shot off. Where Luke has loads of endurance and extraordinary reflexes, Ahsoka answers these with her martial training and natural spatial awareness. Ahsoka's hand-to-hand martial skill is highly developed, showcasing her skill against enemies she faced during the Clone Wars and Rebel skirmishes. Much like an Aikido master, she redirected her opponent's energy rather than meet them head-on, which aligns with her more spiritual growth as an adult, rather than a martial growth. And this marriage of practiced martial skill and mental maturity goes a long way in a physical confrontation. This is all grouped with Ahsoka's natural biology as a Togruta, who are noted for their large montrals, which allow for spatial awareness, similar to echolocation, like bats. According to the Clone Wars Encyclopedia, her montrals were not yet developed, but logically as an adult, this natural talent should be elevated and fully developed. But her greatest strength is her ability to augment her physical abilities. She is something of a ballerina with the Force, and it isn't as though her natural biology had anything to do with it. Togruta are not known for significant acrobatics, meaning Ahsoka's gift is all her own. The greatest discrepancy between the two is their strength and fortitude. And as the theme of this matchup goes, it comes down to their contention with Vader. Luke can meet strength with strength. As indicated in the Return of the Jedi novelization, Vader was shocked by Luke's equal strength to his own, and when bolstered by a dark side amp, Luke plowed through his father's defenses. Ahsoka has leveraged against more powerful foes than herself in the past, showcasing her own grit for durability, but she simply could not match Vader's strength for strength. Usually, Ahsoka undermines stronger foes with her agility and speed, but against an adversary like Vader, who does not let up, there isn't much for her to fall back on. Yet that does not mean that she cannot endure punishment. As indicated in the Jedi Path, she was capable of in-battle healing techniques that widen the threshold of her pain tolerance. This may even be bolstered by her ability to survive the long fall on Malachor after being force-pushed by Vader. Looking at this purely on the merits of physical attributes, Ahsoka is clearly the more nimble of the two, but Luke was not wanting for dexterity, and Luke should be able to do what he did to Vader against Ahsoka. Considering Vader was put on his back foot, so too should Ahsoka, but Tano could press her own advantage by way of her martial skill. While Luke had amazing stamina and strength, he was not exactly a trained martial artist, at least with regards to hand-to-hand combat. In this way, the favor tips to Ahsoka, who can more likely, in a pure physical sense, subvert Luke's lack of formal training in this regard. Tano's spatial awareness could also be a benefit, but against Luke's own feats for reflex, it's unlikely the scales would tip in her favor based solely on this specific, outlier ability. Still, her more practiced form of martial arts should earn her the slight edge for her physical abilities. Darth Vader, Darth Sidious, and Yoda all saw Luke Skywalker as a capable Force user with immense potential. Vader regarded Luke as potentially more powerful than Anakin, Sidious feared the potential within Luke, and Yoda declared that there was no more for him to learn. Yoda also saw great potential in Ahsoka, which is why he made her a Padawan at such a young age. Even the High Council saw this at the end of her career, nearly knighting her at the age of 17. And as an adult, this power is elevated from a combative talent to a spiritual one. Though Luke has never showcased the same power as his father, he does have a deeper appreciation for the Force. Unlike Anakin, whose true training happened during the Clone Wars. Luke's training was conducted in relative peace under Yoda. His combative abilities and applications with the Force might not match a Jedi of old, but he still held a lot of potential. It was Yoda's training that helps Luke gather a more complete understanding of the Force. As Yoda would advise, Luke uses the Force for knowledge and defense, not attack. Luke has control of his rage. Luke has trust in the Force. His strength comes from his ability to redirect and incapacitate. He finds ways to use the Force with respect. This is highlighted most in his showings in Shattered Empire, where he easily deflected blaster fire and force pushed stormtroopers away, as well as catch and redirect a set of thermal detonators before they blew. But never outright killing anyone he did not have to. His farsight is also quite fierce, able to perceive the danger his friends were in, destroy the Death Star, and deflect a series of blaster bolts with no formal training. Ahsoka shares this talent for farsight and perception, able to sense Plo Koon during the Battle of Christophsis, or sensing the emotions of the slaves on Zygeria, or the children captured by Cad Bane. These powers were akin to Leia Organa or Depa Billaba, who also had a talent for Jedi empathy, above their other abilities. For Ahsoka, these talents are even more developed as an adult, as stated by Henry Gilroy of Rebels.
So you could say on some level, while she's become more measured, her growth is more spiritual in nature.
But Ahsoka couples this empathetic use of the Force with more practical applications as well. At the start of Ahsoka's career, she certainly aligned more with the Jedi Guardian. Coming from a long line of lightsaber duelists, she favored and honed more physical forms of lightsaber combat, rather than more mystical Force powers. Most of her Force abilities are designed for utility, the slashing push technique a signature for her throughout the years, even briefly pushing Vader back. This all culminates in Ahsoka's well-rounded use of the Force, more in line with the Jedi Sentinel, who balance martial skill with Force tactics. But, in a combative sense, there is more to the Force than Force pushes. Luke is naturally talented with his defensive efforts, notably his untrained abilities with deflection, able to throw up an active Force wall against Vader during their fight on Bespin. Additionally, he was able to momentarily deflect Emperor Palpatine's Force lightning before succumbing to the Sith Lord's power. Pretty significant, considering Luke's lack of training, and Palpatine's raw and practiced power. Ahsoka doesn't have many significant defensive showings with the Force, but she should have a passive Force wall that can defend against minor attacks. Her Force wall has only been penetrated by the likes of Darth Vader, and only after being whittled down by his powerful blows. Though it's within reason that her Force abilities are favored more to her offensive output than her defensive profit, at least in relative terms. She presumably balanced the two where she can. Comparing the two, Luke has the advantage for sheer potential. Being the son of the man with the highest Force potential in the galaxy has its benefits, but Ahsoka has the advantage in terms of Force integration and application. Though Luke was exposed to tactical uses of the Force through Vader, failing to initially overcome thrown objects, he did not seem to apply these same techniques in his own style. Luke seemed to favor and adapt a more rooted approach to the Force, using it mostly to bolster his stamina and his reflex with regards to lightsaber combat. By contrast, Ahsoka integrated the Force into her combat seamlessly, even catching opponents off guard, when said opponents were more ferocious than she. Against Luke, there is certainly a chance for him to effectively defend against Ahsoka's telekinetic pushes. I would even say that he is more inclined to defend against that than multiple thrown objects at this stage in his life. But I am not confident he can apply his own use of the Force against Ahsoka in any significant way, based on his achievements. If I were to side with one or the other, I would go with Ahsoka. While she would likely not match Luke's raw power, she would more likely subvert him through her more experienced application of the Force. Still, I do not think Ahsoka's advantage is significant enough to overcome Luke, just enough to earn her a slight edge for her Force abilities. Luke Skywalker has a natural ability with the lightsaber, even more so than he does with the Force itself. Not only does Luke have mounting strength, but his decision-making is quick-witted, moving in the span of a thought. And though his training and his experience is very limited, he molds himself after Vader's own lightsaber style through his experience with the Dark Lord. And Darth Vader regarded Luke as the best challenger he had in years. Initially, Luke was trained by Obi-Wan, who taught him the most standard sequences of movement, a discipline of Shicho, the first form of lightsaber combat. Luke may have also learned the defensive principles of Form 3, Soresu, from Obi-Wan's journals. And when training with Yoda, it can be assumed that he learned the acrobatic techniques of Form 4, Ataru. All of this would play on the foundations of the fifth form, Jimso, which Luke learned intuitively through active combat with his father. Jimso is perhaps the most balanced style with regards to offense and defense. It is based around strength-based counterattack, manifesting its offense from a steady guard. Luke is capable of applying this strength-based offensive, but he is also capable of a stonewall defense. Further, he applies acrobatics when looking for better positioning. And when looking at all these grouped together, we can see how well-rounded and how intuitive Luke is as a lightsaber duelist. As stated in Fight Saber, an observing Jedi Master will be astonished at Luke's instantaneous learning in battle. This balanced style plays into Luke's mentality as a fighter, holding his ground, weathering the storm his opponent throws at him, and then following up with decisive action, either by way of a strong counter or a speeding blitz. A nice hybrid style of Ataru and Jimso in concert. Though Ahsoka was trained by Anakin Skywalker, a brash duelist in his own right, she adapts a more acrobatic style to suit her physique. She fully embodies the full form of Ataru, not only by way of her lightsaber movesets or her acrobatic somersaults, but the use of her entire body as a weapon. As previously stated, she was quite skilled with her unarmed martial arts, and to me, this derived from Ataru's discipline, and she supplements that skill with a Jarkai variant of the form, wielding 2 standard lightsabers in dual blade tandem. As a Padawan, the only thing that kept her from high proficiency with the form was a more disciplined and subdued version of the style, which, as we can observe from her Rebel showings, she most certainly had.
I need a lot more training.
That all said, Ahsoka was not an Ataru purist, adopting other styles of combat to color her use of the technique, such as the quarterstaff training of Niman, the blaster deflection of Form 5, as well as the unorthodox reverse grip of Xi'an. But her dual blade style, especially when coupled with an inverted grip, sacrifices reach for more speed and rapid cuts. Another detraction of inverted grips is that it sacrifices strength, which is already a disadvantage for a dual-bladed Ataru specialist, though she did very well to integrate the Force into her lightsaber sequences, a trait of a Niman specialist. But most of her technique funneled back into Ataru, using her speed and agility as a primary tool to overcome her opponent's guard. This all plays into Ahsoka's overall mentality as a fighter, and what shapes her as a duelist. Her advantages were always by way of her speed. She knew reach and leverage would never be a viable option, nor strength or power blows, so she adopts an acrobatic and speed-based style that enables her to breach an opponent's defensive bubble. See for instance, her fight with Pre Vizsla, where she used her superior agility to subvert his guard, or her attempts to subvert Vader by constantly leapfrogging from flank to flank. But against enemies who can match her speed, or were simply more skilled, like Vader, her disadvantages become more apparent. Nevertheless, Ahsoka's dueling abilities had a strong foundation and infrastructure that could contend with the likes of Masters. So, let's get to the elephant in the room, Ahsoka and Luke's fights with Darth Vader. Now some might simply say that this is an easy thing to determine. Luke beat Vader, Vader defeated Ahsoka, so by way of the transitive property, Luke overcomes Ahsoka. The issue with this system is that it does not apply context. Determining how one opponent might fare against another is not simple algebra, because people do not function as constants like numbers do. People are variables, and the context they find themselves in mean quite a lot. That's why we sometimes get equations like this. Anakin defeated Dooku, though Dooku has beaten Obi-Wan 3 times might I add, and Obi-Wan has vanquished Anakin. At face value, this might make one scratch their head, but with context, which I won't get into with this video with regards to Dooku, Anakin, and Obi-Wan, this type of ABC logic comes to light. When looking at Ahsoka's fight with Vader, the context is straightforward. Both she and Vader are perfectly willing to end the other, and once engaged in combat, Ahsoka holds her own for a time, but is ultimately subdued by Vader. Though some argue that Ahsoka was not fighting Vader at his prime, while Luke was. So when the heck was Darth Vader's prime? Rebels Recon says this.
This is Vader in his prime. You gotta remember how far we've come from the character when he was Anakin. He has so buried the good person that he was.
The Return of the Jedi novelization says Vader had never been any better than he was at this point. George Lucas has said this of Vader.
Because we'd actually never seen real Jedis at work. We'd only seen crippled half-droid, half-men, and young boys that had learned from these old people.
Which is expanded in Fight Saber, which says the Dark Lord was just a shadow of his former self. But then Lucas specified that he wanted the lightsaber fighting in the original to improve.
In every episode from 4, 5, and 6, I kept improving the sword fighting.
Which correlates with the Fight Saber article, which does say Vader improves from his fight on the Death Star. But this all doesn't really make sense with Vader having a spirited fight with Ahsoka years prior. Here's the thing about Star Wars continuity, it's a mess, even with the new story group. But in both continuities, whether Vader had some insane dip in skill come A New Hope, or not, Luke did face the better version of Vader. The complication comes with Luke's fight with Vader. As I've covered in previous videos, Luke is one of those natural talents who can quickly adapt and contend with those more experienced than himself, though both he and Vader can be seen holding back in their fight, with Luke unwilling to face his father.
I will not fight you, Father.
And Vader having conflict.
Your thoughts betray you, Father. I feel the good in you. The conflict.
The Return of the Jedi novelization makes it clear that Luke was beginning to legitimately surpass his father. So what does that mean for Ahsoka as a duelist? To me, Ahsoka holds a good chance to contend with Luke because of not only her extensive experience fighting the likes of Asajj Ventress, General Grievous, and Darth Vader, but because of her style, which Luke would not be familiar with. Luke's entire style, outside of a few other fights within the comics, is crafted around Vader himself. Like his father, he adapted a more balanced Jimso fencing technique with a suitable supplement of Ataru acrobatics. But over this time, all Luke knew was Vader and this specific type of fighting. Against Ahsoka, he would have a harder time of adapting, especially against her unorthodox dual blade technique and fast-paced style. Where Luke is a stand-up fighter, Ahsoka is more kinetic. There is a possibility Luke could overcome Ahsoka, much as he did against Vader, especially when Ahsoka's dual blade form is noted to be weak against such attacks. But Ahsoka could answer or overcome this by way of her more nimble flank subversion, as she did against Vader.
Anakin taught her to fight much larger opponents than her. Someone exactly like Darth Vader.
Luke could try to match her gymnastics with his own, but Ahsoka has better showings of using her speed as a tool, keeping the pressure on the young Jedi Knight. As straight lightsaber duelist, I see this as a toss-up, with a determining factor relying on how well Luke could adapt to Ahsoka's style. But with Luke's track record, his ability to adapt, coupled with Ahsoka's disadvantages against skillful strength-based techniques, I would say Luke is the slight edge for his dueling abilities. So here we go, Luke Skywalker versus Ahsoka Tano. Definitely one of the more interesting matchups because of their close relationships and contentions with Darth Vader. Both were shaped by Anakin Skywalker in one way or the other, and Anakin Skywalker was molded by them. Where Ahsoka can be seen as a failure for Anakin, the Padawan that got away, the Padawan he could not train. Luke was a new hope in more ways than one. Luke represented family, something Vader could call his own, and someone who could be used against the Emperor. But Luke was also a new hope for Vader's redemption. As Pablo Hidalgo would say on Twitter, Luke's weapon in the end was compassion. But if Luke and Ahsoka fought each other one-on-one, who would most likely come out on top? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place on Exar Kun's temple on Yavin 4. The following is a hypothetical explanation of the possible outcomes. In the early fight, I see Ahsoka taking the lead in the engagement, much as we saw from her fights against the Inquisitors and Vader, leaping straight into action. Ahsoka's rapid fighting style would initially catch Luke off guard, as he tried to learn how to deal with her twin blades and less power-based offensive. And unlike his fight with Vader, someone's style he modeled himself after, and one he was comfortable with, I do not think Luke would try to press an early fight advantage against such a foe. Though Luke could defend against Ahsoka's attacks well enough, in these early fight scenarios, I do not see him coming ahead. Instead, I see Ahsoka coming away with a 1-0 advantage. In this scenario, she could catch Luke almost completely off guard, using one blade to feint an attack and the other to strike true. Or rather, she could play a game of leapfrog with Luke and undermine his flank. This scenario makes her a likely victor early in the bout, but I don't find this to be the most likely scenario due to Luke's own reflex and ability to adapt to new situations. In the mid-fight, if Luke maintains his guard, I see Ahsoka peppering Luke with physical martial arts and metaphysical force abilities. Two fighting techniques Luke is not exactly designed to match up against. Though on both counts, I believe Luke can manage Ahsoka's kicks and punches or her telekinetic shoves. In fact, with regards to Ahsoka's integrated use of pushing slash techniques, I think Luke is better suited. The type of force abilities that Luke might have more trouble dealing with, I feel, is distraction-based and indirect. For example, I think someone like Vader or Dooku have a better chance against Luke than Ahsoka in terms of a force assault. When Ahsoka uses the Force in combat, it's a relatively direct and forward momentum shove, rather than an indirect target like a loose stone or broken pillar. Or better yet, a more subtle push to an ankle or otherwise, much like Darth Zana attempted against Darth Bane. And even if Ahsoka did express a skill with such indirect uses of the Force, Luke has still shown that he can contend with masters. So really, Ahsoka's Force advantage isn't that significant against Luke outside of a nuisance, and her Force abilities have never ended in engagements with another Force sensitive, merely kept her competing in a fight. However, in the mid-fight, I do see Ahsoka taking a close 3-2 advantage. With Luke becoming more comfortable with Ahsoka's blade work, he would start applying the strong counters he was capable of, but I'm not 100% confident he could dominate or decisively overcome Ahsoka. Though he can certainly contend with her martial skill and Force abilities individually, I don't see him taking effective advantages of his own as a collective. The compounded effort of these abilities, as used by Ahsoka, would be a much different hand dealt to Luke, unlike Vader, who was relatively straightforward in his fights against his son. In the late fight, I see the pendulum falling in favor of Luke, not so much because he has superior stamina to Ahsoka and would outlast her, but because he would finally have her pegged down. He would understand how to manage her speed-based assaults, how to cope with her disruptive Force pushes. He would understand how to defend against her hand-to-hand skill, using his celebrative reflex to stay a step ahead of her. The longer a potential fight went on, the better it would be for Luke, and the worse it would be for Ahsoka. Luke would be able to mount an assault Ahsoka could not cope with, whittling down her endurance and her greatest advantage, her speed. And the currency for speed is energy. In the late fight, I see Luke taking a 3-1 advantage. Much like he put Vader on his back foot, so too would he put Ahsoka on hers. The difference between his fight with Vader and his hypothetical fight with Ahsoka is that he would take longer to get there than he did with Vader, far less decisive. Of all the scenarios, I gotta be honest, I'm not sure where this ends exactly. I'm recording this piece the day I'm supposed to upload this video, and I've literally no idea who will win this matchup based on what has been discussed. As I'm sure some of you have noticed, the verdict is currently a 5-10 split, but that does not necessarily mean a tie with my 3-section verdict system. I don't see this fight ending so early, though Ahsoka has the advantage there because of her speed base and unique style. Right now I'm going between this ending in the mid-fights with an Ahsoka advantage, or the late fight with a Luke advantage. This matchup really hinges on how well I think Luke would adapt to a style he had never seen or experienced before. How well could he deal with such speed, and how well could he deal with practiced martial skill and an integrated use of the Force? Holistically, I favor Ahsoka. She has the formal training and the greater combat experience, as George Lucas has said of the prequel trilogy Jedi.
To see a Jedi in his prime fighting in the prime of the Jedi, I wanted it to be a much more energetic and faster version of what we've been doing.
But when I break it down piece by piece, I don't see Ahsoka winning by way of the blade, so she would have to apply her other advantages. The issue with these advantages is that they take time to develop. Whittling Luke down with Force pushes and kicks would take time to affect the young Jedi Knight. And Ahsoka's use of the Force is so straightforward, with direct targets instead of indirect targets, that I think Luke's natural talent could cope, just as he briefly did against Vader and Palpatine. But the issue with these contentions are that they fall under some pretty gray area in terms of canon. As Del Rey Books has stated, only novelization material which aligns with the movie are canon, and Luke's ability to deflect Vader with a Force barrier and briefly repel Palpatine are not in the movie. But then we have a sequence like we do in the canon, like Shattered Empire, though Luke was facing against non-Force sensitives in that scenario. What I'm trying to get at is that this matchup is a toss-up, and I can't stress enough how grueling this fight would be. I know there will be some who think Ahsoka is a definitive winner, or that Luke takes it easily, but I don't think it's that simple on either side, and it's negligent to be so dismissive of either of these talented individuals who were sculpted by Anakin Skywalker, but I also don't want to leave this verdict undecided. And with that, I'm going with the individual with the formal training, the one with the more combat experience, if not the one with the more talent. Though she is not as inherently powerful with the Force, I think, with such a close matchup, I defer to Captain Rex.
In my book, experience outranks everything.
Well, if experience outranks everything, I guess I better start getting some.
So in the mid-fight, I can see Ahsoka's experience outpacing Luke's ability and talent before the ties turn to his favor. And thus, after a 5-10 advantage with the mid-fight scenario, Ahsoka Tano, the Avenger, would be the most likely victor. Of course, this is all my opinion, based on the lore of Star Wars. Do you agree that Ahsoka would take a majority victory, or do you believe the son of Skywalker is the most likely victor? Let me know in the comments below, or vote for who you think would win in the top right corner. And of course, peace, love, and may the Force be with you, always.